Welcome to Talking Pictures. My name is Christian Genzel. I'm a filmmaker and film journalist from Salzburg, Austria. Talking Pictures is a podcast series in which I talk to the people who made some of my favorite movies. Today's guest is Barry Opper, best known as the producer of the Critters series, the tongue-in-cheek sci-fi horror series about furry little creatures from outer space creating havoc here on Earth. Barry started out, together with his business partner Rupert Harvey, as the producer of Aaron Lipstadt's 1982 sci-fi cult film Android, which was made in collaboration with Roger Corman and starred Klaus Kinski and Barry's brother Don, who also wrote the screenplay. Barry and Rupert went on to produce the Critters series, which also starred Don as Critter Hunter Charlie, and they also made Aaron Lipstadt's post-apocalyptic film City Limits and the noir-ish crime thriller Slamdance, both also written by Don. Later on, Barry worked as a producer on the first installment of Victor Salva's Jeepers Creepers series, and co-produced video director Marc Klasfeld's feature film debut, the biting satire The LA RIOT SPECTACULAR. In our conversation, Barry recalls how he went from working as a teacher in West Africa to joining the company theater group in Los Angeles and then becoming a movie producer. He tells numerous anecdotes from his various movies, for example, how a young and unknown teenager named Leo DiCaprio became one of the stars of Critters 3. He discusses some of the problems that the productions ran into, including creative differences on Slamdance and a difficult situation on Jeepers Creepers, which led to Barry being fired from the film. Barry also talks about his personal and his creative relationship with his brother Don, and he discusses some of the projects he is currently working on. The interview was conducted in connection with our German language podcast Lichtspielplatz. So if you speak German, please visit lichtspielplatz.at and check out episode number 63, which features an in-depth discussion of Barry's first film Android. Also, make sure to listen to my interview with Android director Aaron Lipstadt here on Talking Pictures. If you enjoy my conversation with Barry Opper, please visit talkingpicturespodcast.com to check out more interviews and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. So without any further ado, here is Barry Opper discussing how he became interested in the world of movies.
I taught school in West Africa my first 2.5 years after college at the University of Illinois. And somewhere over there, I decided I would go to grad school in theater. And I applied from Africa to grad schools. And so I was accepted. While I was in Africa, I couldn't go in for interviews or anything at the University of Southern California, USC. And when I got home from West Africa, I went to Southern California, to University of Southern California in a master's program. One of the first courses I took was called Aesthetics of the Theater. I'd been 2.5 years in a upcountry village of 50 huts, and the language that was spoken there had no more than 5,000 words or so.
Wow.
So Aesthetics of the Theater was a kind of brutal reentry into the United States of America. And it prompted me to drop out of school eventually because I couldn't understand anything anyone said. I couldn't understand long sentences. But while I was there, I got to know quite a few people that formed the theater group called the Company Theater of Los Angeles. And I became a 5-year member of that theater group. At some point, I began running it. It was a collective, but I was writing scripts in the office where the only typewriter was, and I started answering phones. So I became an administrator, and then we formed another theater called the Provisional Theater of Los Angeles. We traveled the world. All of a sudden, I was in theater, and my brother, who dropped out of school, he moved to California to be with me. We lived together, and he joined the theater with me, and I had illusions at one time of maybe being an actor, but my brother, the first time he was on a stage, he was in a play by Edward Bond called Narrow Journey to the Deep North. And he was playing a peasant who was being put in a bag to be thrown in a river because there were too many peasants. And I was watching him perform from the light booth, his first performance. And that was the day I decided I wasn't going to be an actor because he was unbelievable. And I'm sure you're going to ask me questions about my brother because we went on to work together. So my brother, he got married, had a child, and he went to work. He had to go to work. The theater wasn't bringing any money, so he went to work for Roger Corman. And he was a carpenter for Roger Corman, not an actor, not a writer any longer. But a rumor came down in Roger Corman's New World, was it called New World at that time? Anyway, in his studios, that there was a setup for a movie called Battle Beyond the Stars. And it was rumored that if anybody had a script that could be shot on those same sets, that Roger would be interested in financing it. So my brother and a carpenter wrote a script, in maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And Roger said he was interested, but would they be willing to raise half the money, which is typical for Roger Corman, to get in with as little money as he could. And so my brother called me. One of the chief accountants at Roger's place was a man named Rupert Harvey. And my brother put Rupert and myself together to try to raise money so that we could do the movie script that they wrote called Android, which went on to be made at New World and starred my brother and Klaus Kinski. And that was the first movie I made. And that was when I left theater to go into movies. So that's where it all got started.
Yeah, and it's such a brilliant first movie, I think, Android. It's such an interesting blend of science fiction and almost a philosophical approach to, what is humanity, what is like growing up, and
it was an incredible experience to make it. And then the first place we went with it was to film festivals. And I remember there was a screening in Seattle at the Seattle Film Festival. There was a screening at the British Film Festival that were unbelievable. We're talking about 800 to 1,000 seat theaters, and the house came apart watching the movie in those and other film festivals. And we thought we were going to be made, that we were going to get to make any movies we wanted to make in the future. It was very exciting. But then subsequently, Roger tested the movie in, of all places, Las Vegas. And I was at that screening. Maybe 80 people showed up to the test screening. And he decided that he couldn't distribute the film. After all that success at film festivals, of course, Roger never went to film festivals, so he never experienced the film working. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. But all of a sudden, Rupert and I were faced with having to buy the movie back from Roger if we wanted it to go anyplace at all. And so we had to raise more money, and we did. And so we wound up owning the film. But of course, we had no money to really distribute it. So we had to go with a small distributor, and it got very limited distribution. But there still is a cult following for the movie. So, and Klaus Kinski it's a comedy. Yeah. And he was, you've seen it. Klaus Kinski was as good as he is in his serious movies. He was a remarkable comedian. So it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure watching him as an actor. He wasn't that pleasant as a human being.
Do you have any specific experiences there on set with Kinski?
I certainly did. The man is dead, right? So I probably shouldn't talk about it, but he was a notorious skirt chaser. There's a lot of rumors about him that after working with him, I might well believe. But in our case, I mean, just for example, the lead actress in the movie playing Cassandra, the second android to my brother who played the first android, Max 404 in the movie, was the second android that Klaus Kinski's professor was supposed to be creating. And when Klaus was playing scenes with her, I was usually right below camera. So when we were doing her close-ups, Klaus was standing off camera giving her lines, but his hand would go to her lower regions while camera was rolling. And I was sitting under camera and I'd have to pull his hand away so we could finish the scene without, as economically as we could. That's just one example of an uncontrollable man.
Yeah. How did you manage to get him on board in the first place? I mean, it is a first time. You were a first time producer. Aaron was a first time director.
Aaron was a first time director. Klaus's agent in America was a man named Walter Kohner, Kohner. He was pretty notorious as an agent. We called him. He read the script, and he said yes for $100,000. They would do it, which meant we had to go raise more money because that absolutely broke our budget. Our original budget was $500,000 to do the movie. I won't tell you what it ultimately was made for. We still are keeping that secret, but anyway, so we raised more money. We got him, and the rest of the casting were relative unknowns at the time, although some of them were my friends from theater. So Norbert Weisser was from my theater group, and my brother Donnie had worked with him as well. So we were able to cast from actors that I knew that were quite good. And Bree Howard, who played the other female lead in the movie, Aaron had seen, she was a drummer in a all-girl band, and Aaron had seen her perform, and she ultimately was cast as a result of Aaron, our director, having seen her perform as a drummer. Anyway, so that's Android.
Yeah. I imagine it must have been quite challenging to do a movie on such a low budget, and then, none of you really had a lot of experience, I think.
Well, that's correct, but Aaron had been Roger's assistant for several years. Rupert, my partner, had been there with Roger for several years. All the great names that worked with her and went on to work in the studio system. That's the way you came up. That's the way you learned. You were on set. You were in the editing room. I mean, you learned that way. It's a shame that it was a stepping stone at one time and then it was disdained. Work coming out of the low budget world was disdained, but it was not. It was good enough for Francis Ford Coppola and Joe Dante, and all that. Jim Cameron was, in fact, the guy for us, the young kid for us, who did our initial production drawings on Android. And our object on Android was to make it not look like a Roger Corman film. Our spaceships, we did the same corridors for spaceships that Roger had built, but we took everything off the walls and we made everything clean. And some of the initial drawings Jim Cameron did for us. So that was the world of New World at that time. Was you were working with people who were watching and learning.
I kind of feel that it's almost the last era of that of the Corman school of filmmaking, where so many people went on to do
yeah, I think
things.
the home video rose after that,
Mm.
and home video became the testing at the time, like with Sex Lies Videotape, those kind of movies, that were made by RCA, by home video companies. They became the new low-budget films that established people later who became directors for the studio system. And Roger was kind of phased out as a stepping stone.
Mm.
So, yeah, the 80s brought in a new era that kind of negated Roger's company from producing so many great artists.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at just the credits of Android, I mean, it's amazing. Not just with you and Rupert, but Stephen Herrick was involved, and
well, right now it's interesting because I know you want to talk about Critters a bit as well. Steve Herrick was an editor, an assistant editor on Android, and Dominic Muir, Brian Muir, as we knew him, was also an assistant editor. And after we made Android, Steve and Brian brought us this script called Critters to Rupert and I.
Mm-hmm.
And we said, yeah, let's do this. And so that grew out of Android.
Mm-hmm. I see.
And then we said that, Steve said, I want to direct it. And he was nobody. I mean, really, he was an assistant director. And we said we try. Well, we can't promise it. We want to do this script with a few rewrites. We developed it with a little bit more with him, but we said we'll try. We didn't know for sure that Rupert and I had the clout even to do it. So ultimately we did, and we did it with New Line Cinema.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, you managed to really set up a great cast for Critters. I mean, there's so many great actors in there.
Well, it's interesting. Roger, through his lawyer, Roger's lawyers were UCLA grad students becoming lawyers. I mean, he hired would-be lawyers as opposed to people who had their degrees. We were going to do it with his lawyer was Brad Cravoy. His law student lawyer was Brad Cravoy, who and so Roger wanted to do it with us. We wanted to do it at a minuscule budget again. But while we were in Milan showing Android for foreign sales, Rupert and I met Bob Shea, who liked Android a great deal. And when we got back to this country, Bob was going to be staying at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles on a trip to Los Angeles. His home was New York. And that's where New Line Cinema was at the time located. Anyway, one weekend, he said, what do you got? And Rupert and I went and pitched Critters, maybe the week before we were supposed to sign to do a deal with New World.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob said, I'll do the movie with you. And by that Monday, that was a weekend. By that Monday, we had paperwork for, I think it was for a 2-picture deal from New Line. There's a Hollywood story. And all of a sudden, and they agreed to Steve Herrick as director, which we didn't even know we could get done. And that was Steve's first movie as a director. So that's how Critters happened.
Yeah, that's amazing. You did one movie in between, a movie that really went under, City Limits.
Yes, we did. It's which also had a terrific cast from
Yeah.
James Earl Jones, Aaron, and Rupert and myself off of Android were given the right to do a movie, and Aaron wanted to do a motorcycle movie next.
Mm-hmm.
And we developed it, and the financing came together fairly easily, but from a couple of dying companies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to look up. I can't even remember the names. Atlantic Releasing, I think, was the American company, and a British company, and they financed it. And I think the movie was not as great as we envisioned it being.
Mm-hmm.
And it got several worst movie of the year awards. Anyway, it's a post-apocalyptic period, and maybe it was before its time. People didn't believe in the apocalypse then. Maybe they do now.
Yeah, it's a more pressing issue, maybe. But I read that there were actually two versions of City Limits, that you sort of had a first cut, and then that was screened with different music, and then there were reshoots, and the film was recut.
Yes. We eventually we had a score done by John Lurie, who was an incredible saxophone player with a group called Lounge Lizards out of New York. They were at the time a notorious fringe music group, and John did a terrific score. John Lurie went on to star in Jim Jarmusch movies, so he's quite a character, quite a guy. When the movie was finally picked up for a limited release, they said the score's too eclectic, too out there. So we got a composer named Mitchell Froom to do the score, and more electric guitar based motorcycle movie score.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we had to, studios, large or small, take over and change things. And there's a story about Critters I'll tell you along that line, if you're interested.
Absolutely.
Because you're familiar with Critters, yes? You've seen
Absolutely.
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Many times.
All right.
The whole series.
The movie we shot had the family together, but the house had been destroyed in the struggle to beat off the critters to beat the critters at the end. And that was the movie. That was the movie we screened for audience. We tested and everything. The movie was successful. But Bob Shea, who hadn't seen the movie while we were shooting it, said, wait a minute, we can't have a movie where the house is destroyed. It's too downer of a movie. We said, no, Bob, the family's together at the end. That's a victory. They won. So essentially, Bob made us reshoot the ending, and that scene where the house is reconstructed, where they push this magic button that the bounty hunter sort of left them.
Goes backwards.
That's a miniature going together behind them. That was a house no bigger than a printer in their background, and shot in perspective. So that ending that you see on the movie, the house being constructed, was shot, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks after we showed the movie. And that became the ending of the movie.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's such a I mean, it's a cool ending to the film. It's such a nice little joke when the mailbox goes up and the little
Yes,
sign on the
yeah,
mailbox goes up and the cat is in there. That's such a sweet
right.
and
That was all scripted after we had finished the movie. Now, I don't know whose ending was better. um, and I'm fine with this ending, but I'm
mhm,
just saying that came after the fact.
mhm. I see.
I remember this is a long time ago. We're talking about 1983 or four, something like that. And Steve, first time director, was devastated by
Mhm,
Bob wanting to change the movie, but that was the company that was putting up the money for the movie. So they made that. I don't know that we'd have been easily convinced, but Bob
mhm,
can take responsibility for that ending.
mhm. I see.
I give it to him.
Interesting. Now, Critters again was an instance where you worked with your brother. You worked with him on Android. You worked with him on City Limits, and again on Critters. So, can you tell me a little bit about the relationship you have with your brother and the collaboration that you have?
Yeah, my brother is 8 years younger than I am, and in a lot. I mean, I remember taking him to his first kindergarten class. Um, uh, in a lot of ways, I think maybe I know my mom was sick uh, in a lot of my brother's younger years. So I think, and my father was working at least 6 days a week. So I think I was more parental in some ways with my brother, being 8 years ahead of him. I was the older brother that did things first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, whether it was taking drugs or whatever it was. I mean, it was hard when you were 8 years behind. Um, and, and then I went off to teach school in Africa. So when he got out of high school, he came out to live with me. And that was a relationship that didn't work great actually living together um, because at his, whatever it was, 18-year-old phase of life, he was still leaving dirty socks on the floor. And it's a little hard to live with. But he was almost anything he touched in an artistic realm, he did well. He painted wonderfully as a teenager. He wrote wonderfully in his late teens, early 20s. And then when he joined our theater, he was an incredible actor. Uh, he wasn't John Gielgud technical actor because he had a Chicago accent, but he filled every role he played so wonderfully that you felt you knew the character, which is the case with Max 404, with
Mm-hmm.
the character he played in City Limits, and then his Charlie McFadden in the Critters movies. I mean, he to this day can go anywhere in America and he's recognized
Mm-hmm.
fondly. You can see, and people show their Critters tattoos to my brother in Florida, and wherever he goes, he's recognized. So we continued working together for essentially the rest of our lives. We have a brother in between us who's since passed away. Um, but Don and I were very close. And, we had the same problems that brothers have. Sometimes we had huge fights. I remember on Critters 2, I don't remember what we were fighting about, but I remember walking the streets of that town we built for Critters 2. We built the town of Grover's Bend. We were having some argument, and while we were shooting in the church, my brother and I were walking. It's a December night in California, but it was really cold. And I remember shivering as we were having some fight walking down the street of Grover's Bend. fake Grover's Bend. It wasn't as if we were all loving all the time, but we've never been apart.
Mhm.
And I just called him before this interview to tell him not to give me a call between 10 and 12. So our time. And I still, he's now working as a carpenter. He kind of left the film industry after several scripts of his, which are terrific scripts, were optioned in one way or another by the studios, and the studio executives drove my brother mad with changes. He couldn't, he'd sit in a room of 10 or 12 people, and they wouldn't realize that changes that one person is asking for the third act totally changes the first act. And then as an actor, the audition system was almost more than he could handle. I mean, after a while. And I don't know if you followed his career, but, he did some recurring roles on Miami Vice. He did, you'd see him. It's funny, every time I would go to Europe for a film festival or something, I would I'd be in Italy and I'd turn on the television and I'd see my brother in something that he did speaking Italian, like a Miami Vice episode or something. I had this uncanny ability to just switch on the television. There was my brother doing something. So anyway, so we are still close, and I still think he's very talented.
Yeah, me too. I mean, like you say, he really is the heart and soul of the whole Critter series and also of Android. I mean, he's such an interesting character actor, I think. I've always been quite disappointed that he didn't really do so much after the Critter series. Also as a writer, I think. Such a voice of his own.
Clint Eastwood optioned a script of his, and he went through Universal meetings, with the studio and Clint for months and months and months, and eventually they didn't do that movie. There was a script at Warner Brothers that we had that was a beautiful script that was very autobiographical that George Harrison was going to do with Warner Brothers. We went through months and months of those meetings. It wound up not getting, there were so many heartbreaking events in terms of Hollywood. But, those scripts he wrote stand up today. Not to be bitter, but my nepotism with my brother was not strong enough to beat the prevailing nepotism of Hollywood, which is that not a lot of people like Marilyn Monroe are discovered at Schwab's pharmacy. It's the industry isn't like that any longer. So yes, I feel badly that I wasn't able to do more to help, particularly his writing. His acting is also fantastic, but and we did Slam Dance, which I know was on your list of things to ask about with Wayne Wang. That was an unbelievable script before Wayne got a hold of it, which in the week before we started shooting, he decided the script didn't work. So we didn't shoot the script that was written. It became different, and then it became a race to try to reconstruct the script before we ran out of money, which we didn't fully do. Now I found out I really liked Wayne a lot. But the problem was I found out after the fact, when we did the deal for Slam Dance, it was between Island Alive and Carrie Brokaw and a guy named Scott Meek, who was with Zenith in England. Those two companies went together to finance Slam Dance. We didn't have a director when they financed Slam Dance. So those two companies and myself and Rupert went through the director choices. We finally decided on Wayne, but I didn't research it well enough to know that he had a habit on his prior movies of falling out of love with the script the week before, which is precisely what happened on Slamdance. And we put together an unbelievably good crew of people. Amir Mokri, who shot it, was an artist that I saw this video he did of the Bob Seger song. I can't remember. It's in front of a railroad. It's the most gorgeous music video I've ever seen in my life. Anyway, so we put together a company of people that were incredible, but we threw out the script in many ways the week before. And then we cut Wayne's version of the film. And the point I was going to make is this was before digital editing. So we were cutting on film. We tested Wayne's version of the film, and A, we were not happy with it, and B, it didn't test, it didn't test very well. But it was cut on film. You can't just push buttons and get back. So we had a finite amount of money. There was no more money coming from the two companies that were financing us, Island Alive and Zenith. And so we had to, we said, we're going to reconstruct what was shot into the script that my brother Donnie had written.
I see.
We never made it fully back before we ran out of money. So the version of Slamdance that's out there is somewhere between Wayne's version, which he has disavowed, and our version, which we wanted to get back to. So that's what, so there are elements that are really interesting in Slamdance. It's a gorgeous movie, but it never got quite back to the script that it was intended, that we wanted to shoot. So that's the story of Slamdance.
Yeah. There's so many, like you say, so many great elements. I mean, just the visuals, Mokri's visuals. I think you could do a frame of like every second shot and just hang it on your wall, and it's just such an amazing movie to look at.
And the cast was fantastic. Of course, the casting of Tom Hulse was amazing at the time because he had just been up for an Academy Award with Mozart. But Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio and Virginia Madsen. The casting director we got, Lorna Kennedy, was she's the best casting director I've ever worked with. So there are elements that are, and the idea of Adam Ant in the movie was a remarkable idea. That was Laura's idea.
Harry Dean Stanton is in the film, and he's always a pleasure to watch.
Yeah, and so the cast is fantastic. The film just never got back to where we wanted it. Both Rupert and I wanted maybe 6 more weeks to get back. Anyway, we never got it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can feel that when you watch the film, that the elements are there, they just don't quite come together. There's something missing or something that went wrong. Without knowing the backstory, you just feel that something went wrong there, especially in the later parts of the movie when it all falls apart, and when you should be able to follow the whole mystery plot, the whole conspiracy part of the story, and it's sort of, you get lost in a while, in a sense.
Yeah, it was all there late. I mean, you can't look back and redo anything, but I could send you. I mean, the script, the threads are all there. We just didn't shoot all the threads. So That's my view of it. I mean, Wayne's got another view, I'm sure, but that's my assessment of what happened with it.
And then after Slamdance, you went back to the world of Critters and continued the series. How did you become involved with Mick Garris as a director?
Well, by the time of Critters 2, New Line was now, except for the ending of Critters 1, the first one, we were sort of on our own to do the Critters movies. New Line was not an active daily partner. To do Critters 2, we now had a studio as a partner. So they appointed one of their executives, Jeff Sheckman, as our studio liaison, our studio head. And he came at us, at Rupert and myself, with a list of directors. And we met them. They were considered hot young directors by New Line. And so Mick was one of them. And we liked his personality. And so he became the director of Critters 2. He was a person brought to us by New Line. I cannot remember if we ever offered it to Steve Herrick, who had gone on to direct Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure after our movie. But Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, until Orion picked it up, was sitting in a vault someplace, not considered distributable. And it was, Steve made the movie and went on a depressive vacation after making Bill and Ted's, because the studio that originally put up the money for it wasn't going to distribute it. So I can't tell you, in terms of my memory, I mean, Steve's still around, whether we even could offer it to him at that point. I think he'd advanced beyond us by that point, but that's a foggy memory. So that's how we decided that Mick Garris would direct. He was also a writer-director, but we had my brother in the stable writing behind him as well, in the especially the Charlie McFadden role. So that's how that happened.
Do you remember some of the discussions you had on how to continue the series in terms of the tone or the things that you would want to see in a sequel, or the directions that you didn't want to go into?
You know, I mean, theoretically, this idea, doing sequels has always been really interesting to me, because I always liked Alien better than the sequel Aliens, because the monster wasn't seen in Alien. And I always thought the audience's imagination is better than, I mean, these were the early days of CG, but was better than any monster you could build or create or anything. If you actually saw it, it wasn't as good as your imagination. So I know that's one person's opinion, that now through the rise of CGI and everything, they're making awfully good, scary elements and everything. So at that time, there was a kind of conversation about, when we decided to do Critters 2, which was double the budget of the first Critters, whether we should see the danger or fear the danger that wasn't there. And with Mick, it became a bit more of a comedy as opposed to a scare movie. Now, I'll go back with another little story, if you don't mind.
Sure.
At the time we were talking about doing Critters, Bob Shea had given Rupert and I a script that he was thinking of doing, that he wanted the two of us to see if we could raise money to help finance the movie because Bob was afraid to finance it at the time all by himself, or he wanted somebody to back him up. Rupert and I read the script and said, Bob, we're not interested. It's too mean-spirited for us. That script was Nightmare on Elm Street. I tell that story to tell you why Critters was a little bit different for us, was because Critters 1 was not mean-spirited. It was made for a younger audience. And although we tried to maintain the scares in it, there was a romp kind of feel to it too. I mean, you were laughing as you were jumping.
Mm-hmm.
Right or wrong, that was sort of where our sensibilities were at that time. And Rupert went on to produce one of the Nightmare series for Bob. His wife, Rachel, directed one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we went back and had something to do with Nightmare on Elm Street afterwards. But at the time, we said no. Although we might have been tapped out at the time. We weren't rich kids at all. And I don't know, at that time, we could have raised money to help Bob make the movie. But he was asking us if we could. So anyway, that's another little story. But anyway, to get back to Critters 2 now, I think with Mick's personality, it was taken a little bit more into the humor end than the scare end, knowing that our audience was a young audience. It was not an audience like Nightmare on Elm Street audience, which were little older teenagers. Ours was a movie that 11 or 12-year-old kids were looking at, and it was forming. I mean, as I referred to earlier, my brother Donnie was to Critters conventions, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. He was still being asked to Critters conventions around the country, and people in their 40s now are showing him their Critters tattoos all over their body. I mean, so there was a cult following to Critters that carried through all 4 of them. But compared to 1, I think it's interesting. If you're talking about 2, it was a little larger, but a little more comical than scary.
I don't know if you've ever encountered the German version of the second film, because, I mean, the critters don't talk during the movies. They just have these funny little voices. But in the second one, in the German version, they are actually dubbed and they sort of talk throughout the movie.
I would have been, no, I haven't seen it, but I would have been so pissed off because, interestingly, to jump to the present, Rupert and I had a deal with New Line that then was bought by Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers owned the Critters franchise ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 2 sequels that have been made that have Rupert's and my name on them that in reality we had nothing to do with.
Oh, okay.
But both of them went a way that pissed us off immensely. And that is writing, well, we called it Marx Brothers routines for the Critters. And also the Kyoto brothers who designed the Critters are equally as pissed about it. I mean, so we think that in both there was a series that was made. This is in the last 5 years, and there was a made-for-TV movie that was shot in South Africa that brought back Dee Wallace as the bounty hunter that make human the Critters by giving them routines. And it's not the way any of us that created the Critters movies would have ever gone. So if the Germans did that to us, we'd have been angry at that point. Because the ominous nature of the Critters was they were thinking beings, but they weren't Americans. They weren't Marx Brothers or the Three Stooges. Anyway.
Yeah, luckily they only did it for the second movie. For the other ones, they just went with the original voices.
Oh,
But in
good,
the
good.
second one,
I'm
they
glad
have
to hear
those
that.
almost like Smurfs, with those high-pitched voices when they come on
Mhm.
screen, and they do all
No,
sorts of
no, that's
jokes
if you
too.
look at the series that was made.
Hmm.
I mean, essentially, Rupert and I sold our names. They bought us off because
Hmm.
they the deal with that we had done with New Line, it was if there was ever any sequels done under the deal, they would have to come to Rupert and myself first.
Hmm.
But both of those other movies were hidden from us until it was too late for us to have any effect on it.
I see.
And so then they came to us because they knew they had a contract problem if they didn't. And then they just offered us money to get us to sign off. And at some point they wore us down.
Hmm. Yeah, but you were involved with Critters 3 and 4,
Yes.
the original sequels, and I think you actually became more involved with them because you actually have a screenwriting credit on both of them, and you did second unit on both of them.
Here's what happened. This was years later. This was in 92, I think. So this was after both the movies had come out. And this was, I think, prior to it being made as a feature film, but it was right at the beginning of the time when it appeared to Rupert and myself that people were interested in sequels and movies of the 80s that they had loved, that young people were interested when they were young adults to go check in on the characters that they knew and loved or whatever. So New Line really didn't want to make another two Critters movies. But Rupert and I pitched a plan. The exec at New Line that we pitched it to was Steve Abramson, who was the treasurer at New Line. And the exec at New Line was Mark Ordesky, who went on to, he used our same formula to make his movies,
Yeah.
which was, we pitched to New Line, look, let us make two movies at once, and we can make them for the same amount of money that we would have made one movie, because, we'll build on one half of a stage an urban apartment building, and on the other half of the stage, we'll build a spaceship setup, and we'll move first from one movie to the next movie. We'll hire two different directors so they can be adequately prepped. Anyway, ultimately, because it was so inexpensive, I think they went for the idea, and we made Critters 3 and 4. Rupert and I did do the stories, complete stories for those two movies, I believe, I think we submitted them before we got the deal for New Line or whatever it was. And so we got Christine Peterson to direct the first, and Rupert wanted to direct, and we convinced them to let Rupert direct the second. So the movies were conceived at the same time, but given the two different directors, they took on a very different tone.
Mm-hmm.
But they were shot at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like shooting a 180-page script. I think we had a 2-week hiatus between the shooting of both of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the same crews, the same DP, the same crews were on the movie, except different directors. I think it was the same production designer even, but I'm not sure. I believe it was Philip Foreman who did both.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's kind of the story of Critters 3 and 4. And we do have story credit, yes.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's such a great cast that you assemble. I mean, in part 4, you have Brett Dourif and Angela Bassett, and in 3, I mean, obviously, well, you didn't know that back then, but having Leo DiCaprio in that movie is so amazing.
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, out of Roger Corman, who had a habit of doing that too, of discovering talent, who shot Critters 2? Russell Carpenter. Went on to win an Academy Award for Terminator and Okay. Who was in Critters 3? Leonardo DiCaprio. Angela Bassett in Critters 4. Brad Dourif. So we have a habit of, with Angela, who was a Yale acting student, had not really done anything. We did discover a lot of people who then went on to disavow us in their, I mean, for Leo, I mean, the way we got Leo was George, his father. Don and I were long residents of a community, of a place in Los Angeles called Echo Park, which is kind of a notorious artist area in Los Angeles. It's gone through a lot of changes. But a local poet was named George DiCaprio, was Leo's father, who Don better than me, but we knew him. And so we went to George. I mean, Leo had just been in a few television shows. We needed a 15-year-old boy. He was ideal. And so we went to George to see if Leo might be interested. So we got Leo through his father. And we're still in touch with my brother's still in touch with George. In fact, he borrowed money from George once when I was in jail to help bail me out. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. But anyway, so yeah, we were pretty good at finding talent, but to go back to Slam Dance, that my brother's script was circulating so widely amongst actors that Tom Hulse was sleeping over at a friend's house, and I can't remember what actor it was, whose agent had sent him the script, and he was sleeping on a bed on the floor in the living room, and the script was in the living room, and he read it because he couldn't go to sleep that night. And then his agent called us the next day and said, might you be interested in Tom? Secondarily, in our office that we were running production out of, one afternoon, completely unasked, Laura Dern and I can't remember her name, another notorious, well-known actress, they walked into our office. They had read the script and they asked us to audition.
Wow.
Just from reading the script. So I mean, I think we weren't the only ones that loved that script the way we did. Well, anyway, so that's the Slam Dance, another reflection on Slam Dance. So yeah, Leo was the boy in Critters 3.
And I was always very happy that Bill Hunt was in Critters 3, that he had a substantial role in Critters 3.
Bill Hunt was a great friend of mine. He died last year. He was in both the theater groups I worked with. Bill was one of the lead actors. So I'm glad you're following him. And I think you probably know him from Flesh Gordon. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. He was a marvelous friend. He was at my father's memorial service when my father passed away. I mean, he was and so yeah, he was somebody. I mean, there were people from my theater group that were in most of those movies, in smaller parts. Don was part of the theater world too, so so I did fall back on my theater years quite often. Michael Monroe, who was one of the writers under a pseudonym, I believe on Critters 4, was also part of our theater.
It's interesting how that influences the whole, like your whole career in a way, that you sort of go back to those early theater days so often with people involved.
Well, you never lose your past, but but also Rupert and I haven't worked together for years and years and years. He's gone on to have his career. I've gone on to have my career. But we're still close. I mean, we still talk all the time. He lives in Vancouver. When you go through it, you either hate the people or love the people at the end of it. There aren't many people I hate as a result, but I remember the love.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of incredible relationships that were formed.
Mm-hmm.
I still know the composers. I still see some of the composers on our movies. To get back on track, Critters 4, just in terms of tone, Rupert is British.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a little darker than our other Critters movies. But part of it is a sensibility that he brought from the British horror sensibility, I think. So he did bring his own sensibility into the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting to think of those two movies. They were very different in tone. They were shot at the same time.
Mm. Yeah, they feel so different. And I think it's one of the charming things about the series that each one of them has a slightly different tone and has really like the fingerprints of its director on it. So they really feel like separate movies in a way that it's interesting to see how it has those characteristics.
I think we did that on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't know how much conscious purpose that was, but I think we were just not interested in making the same movie over and over again. So I think we each tried to reflect the tone that was there in the room when we met with the directors. And we tried to make new movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always loved the darker tone of Critters 4, and I was always disappointed that Rupert never directed another movie.
Well, he'll be happy to hear that. I think he was desirous of it, but he went on to produce, and he's still producing up there in Canada. So, but yeah, I don't think he willingly did not direct again.
Mm-hmm.
I just think he had projects that weren't financed.
Did you ever think about directing yourself?
I really wasn't interested in directing. I think after the experience of seeing my brother act when initially I wanted to act was a great lesson for me. And that was to find what you do well,
mm-hmm.
and don't be jealous of other people's what they do well, and just keep doing what you do well. So I feel like I found my niche, and that's what I continue doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, after Critters, you've been involved with another really famous horror film, the first part of it at least, Jeepers Creepers. How did that come about?
Yes.
I mean, Francis Ford Coppola was the executive producer on that one.
Yeah, I never met Francis, so he was really just, he had an executive, Linda Reisman was her name, at American Zoetrope, was the only person I ever dealt with. Francis had a history with Victor, the director of the movie, that was kind of long-standing, because Victor had, in one of his earlier movies, had a relationship with a teenage boy that was starring in his movie that became scandalous, and Victor had gone to prison. You know this story? You know all this?
Yeah, I've read about it.
All right. Francis had first seen Victor's work at, I think, the San Francisco Film Festival, at a film festival, might have been La Jolla, I mean, it might have been San Jose, it might have been but it was a film festival up there, up in the north. Francis had seen it when Victor was like an 18-year-old prodigy, and was a fan of his work as a director. So now, years later, Victor had served his time, was trying to make another movie. Francis, to his credit, suffered the slings and arrows of bad press and said, Victor, I'll help you make this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I was brought the script and asked if I would be interested in working on it by Todd Harris, who was also a producer who I had worked with on a movie called Seven Girlfriends.
Mm-hmm.
And I said no because I felt the script needed work, and I did submit notes, and then Victor called me and we began talking about it. So we developed off of notes, and meanwhile, I did several budgets of the film, and I kept getting talked down by American Zoetrope. But I kept saying, this script, you can't manipulate, you can't say we'll do it for this much money when it's going to take this money to do this script. Either the script has to be, and so this is something that would be contested out in the world, but these are all these years later. So I said, I can do it at the money you're giving me if I can spend the contingency on production.
Mm-hmm.
Their head of production said yes to me. About 3 weeks into the shoot, 2 weeks into the shoot, somewhere into the shoot. No, maybe it was at the end of prep. I was the one that found Florida as nobody knew this, but Florida had locations that looked like farmland that, was, except obviously the weather window was better, but it was like farmland. In fact, Florida is the second largest cattle raising state in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. Nobody knew that. So you had tons of farmland, and you had farmland where you didn't see light poles every 10 minutes. So I fell in love with Florida. I brought Victor to Florida. We looked at it. So on the assurance that I could spend the contingency funds, we went ahead and entered pre-production, moved down to Florida. In fact, my son, Nathan, was born in Ocala, Florida, while we were on location.
Mm-hmm.
However, somewhere in late prep, the bonding company said, you know what, they're going to go into the contingency. I can see, they rightfully saw that. And the head of production for Zoetrope did not stand with me. She said, oh yeah, but Barry assured me he could do it for, without spending the contingency, which was a total lie. Mm. Anyway, to make a long story short, I was essentially fired from the movie. Mm-hmm. Although they never said it, I never said it. I think I'm saying it publicly for the first time. They brought in another producer, a guy out of Atlanta, who really, by the second week of production, was working with the bonding company to finish the movie. Mm-hmm. I stayed near Victor on the camera truck and for several weeks. My son had just been born. I was going home to my wife depressed. We had a little house rented that we were living in. We were fighting the battle because people in Florida had found out about Victor's conviction and jail time. So nobody in all the housing I had gotten arranged for him went out the window because people were on a hotline closing us up. So I had to put Victor in a hotel on his own floor. It was, it was like crazy, crazy times. And then eventually I decided this is really, I'm producing in name only. Although, so I got it all the way into production. And all the people are the ones I hired. Don Fauntleroy, who's the DP, the production designer, they all said, should we leave when you leave? And I said, no, make the movie. Anyway, so I left after 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks of the shoot. Victor asked me back to start seeing cuts of the movie. And at that time I said, I'm not really comfortable doing that. So that's the story of me on Jeepers Creepers. I had a lot to do with its development. I had a lot to do with hiring the entire crew. I had a lot to do with how the movie turned from Victor's script to the final script. But I left production.
Wow.
And it still haunts me. I've never, ever had that experience in all my years doing films. So it haunts me to this day.
Again, I'm always amazed at how heartbreaking the movie business can be. I mean, we talked about your brother Don and his scripts, and again, I think this is such an instance where you spend so much time and energy on something, and to have an ending like this, I think it's very disappointing.
Even if you get back into seeing the movie, you'll see that the art direction, like the restaurant they go to is called Opper's Diner.
I've seen it, yeah.
Mine last night. I mean, that was like their little way of, and that was shot after I was gone.
Oh, I see.
It was just their little way to remember me. So, wow. Yes, it was heartbreaking.
Yeah, and it also explains why you weren't involved with the sequels, because that was something that I was wondering about. But yeah.
Well, that is the explanation. I mean, I understood Victor had to make the movie, so he couldn't have stood up, even if he wanted to. He couldn't stood up. No, I do this with Barry or not. So I understand it all from on a human level. But yeah, I think one of the large contributions I've made to all the movies is, I mean, part of producing is overseeing the scripting and the development of the script. And I think I have a good sense on that level. So I enjoy that part.
There's another movie that I wanted to ask you about that you've done after Jeepers Creepers, which is the LA RIOT Spectacular.
Yes.
Such an odd and interesting film. I think Marc Klasfeld's only feature film.
That is. I mean, it was interesting. John Manulis, who's one of the other producers, is the one that brought me on to the movie. Because I had nitty-gritty producing experience, and I think he needed that on the movie. But Marc was a very highly paid video director, and highly successful video director. He wanted to be a feature director as well, as many video and commercial directors were. That was his script. It was as weird as it is in realization. It was low budget, and we but once again, and having Snoop Dogg on the picture is, I mean, if Klaus Kinski was weird in his way, Snoop Dogg is much weirder in his way. Much weirder. I mean, he brings an entire crew on the set. If he's really smart, but he's always 2 hours late after call or so. And if you call him 2 hours early and call it the call, so you have him on time, he's smart enough to know exactly immediately that that's what you're doing. So then he comes 4 hours late. He brings his entire crew, and then he asks for the newest Xbox in his trailer or wherever we have them. And then no matter how you bolt that Xbox down, it's gone the first day, and he doesn't know anything about it. But he's such a generous man, even with all that, saying all that. He's He's funny. He's warm. He just does things his ways, his way. And I guess in the music business, that's no problem. Of course, making films, it is a problem. The cast was once again remarkable. The cast in the movie was remarkable. Marc did an excellent job. We were working on a very limited budget. We were stealing locations. We were shooting in Compton, Watts area. We were doing deals with the gangs on the streets to get protection so we wouldn't go to lunch and have our cameras disappear and stuff like that. We wanted goodwill on the streets. We had a lot of very good Black actors in the movie. It was about Rodney King, which was a very important issue. Well, today it's still, if a fucking guy with, excuse the language.
No problem.
With a video camera had not been sitting in his apartment on his partner, we'd have never known. Rodney King may have complained, but no one would have believed him. You know, it was the first event of those kinds where someone actually filmed it, and now you had to believe. So that the issue was hot. We got to wed actual footage from Rodney King with new footage. That was a great joy of mine, was figuring out a way how to shoot elements of scenes that were on television, use the television, and then cut to our footage and have it be seamless. But it was a comedy. So Marx was spoofing everything as well. People are still fans of the movie. I still hear about it. But once again, it is definitely out there. And I don't know that, I think more than anything, it changed Marc's mind about doing feature films. I think he would be a feature director after that with another film, except that I think he himself decided, I better stick to what I do well and know well. So yeah, I think it was his choice more than anything. We did develop a script for a feature film script, which was his idea and his script. I developed it with him. That never went anywhere. Its central character was a voiceover guy working in the film industry. It was also a comedy, but an edgy comedy.
Yeah. Oh, I would have loved to see that.
So yeah, I do have the script. I think we shot. Yeah, we did. We shot a promotional video for it. We shot maybe 20 minutes. So I do have it.
Interesting. The LA Riot film is I think what's so interesting about it is that there are so few films about the LA riots. I mean, it was such a huge issue, and I've been reading into like reading books on it and everything. And I would have expected it to appear in so many films. But there really aren't a lot of films about the LA riots. There's a TV movie called Riot, which is sort of an episodic.
Yes, I saw that
movie on it with Luke Perry in it. And a couple of years ago, I forget the director's name. It's called Kings, Daniel Craig and Halle Berry. That's set during the riots. And then you have a lot of movies that just, sort of allude to the riots. You have a sort of like a setting, or you have images that remind you of the right. But the LA Riot Spectacular was really one of the very few films that addressed what was going on. I found that really fascinating.
Hollywood has a reputation for being liberal. Liberal is not daring or radical in any way. I've grown as suspicious of a liberal sensibility as I have of any other sensibility. It does not take chances. So the LA riots, just as the George Floyd recent events that provoked riots, are not ones that Hollywood really wants to touch, because they go too far. Liberals won't go that far. They'll have tame politics, but not, they won't take a stand, in my opinion, ever. They just want to sweep under the rug anything that would smack. I mean, here, let's take another example. The Chicago 7 movie. You know that movie, yes?
Aaron Sorkin, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was in the Chicago riot. This is when I was a teenager in Chicago. I was there for that event. That movie rewrote history. It was a really well-made movie. It had a very liberal sensibility, but it did not represent anyone that I knew right. Abby Hoffman was not right. None of the characters, Tom Hayden was not right in that movie. I knew those people. But that's what a liberal mind will do with a true story. They will pablamize it. Even Aaron Sorkin, whose writing I always liked, but I was never there for the events he was writing for, except this one. And I could see what Hollywood did to a really moving story by making the characters Hollywood characters as opposed to real characters. Jerry Hoffman was not the same Jerry Hoffman that I knew in that movie. So I'm just saying, even someone whose work I respected, when I actually saw him change a story that I knew from having lived it, there's something corrupt about that to me.
Yeah, I guess the truth is always so much more complex than what many movies want you to believe. And when you do a political movie, a lot of people sort of want to make a point, and to make a point, you would always have to to be on a very specific side and reduce the complexity of the issue, and sort of really take a stand in a way and not care so much about the different sides of what was going on.
Yeah, I think for me, because I was a late teenager, I was so inspired by these guys, having known them in the streets and seen them and seen their sense of humors and what they really meant by their words. In fact, I was the person, it's in the movie, I was the person, I had met a motorcycler in the parks the weeks before the Democratic convention that I put together with Abby Hoffman and said, why don't you use this guy as a bodyguard? He's willing. He turned out to be an undercover cop. I did that. And that's actually in the movie. But I'm saying that a whole host of characters I was so inspired by, to see them made into Hollywood characters was very difficult for me to take.
I understand, yeah. Have you ever thought about making your own version of that kind of story? Like producing a project that really goes more to the core of what you experienced?
I think the sad truth is, although I came to Android having helped raise money, I'm not a rich kid that was brought up connected to money. I think what I'm saying, which is not sad to me right now, I'm too old to start again. If I financed what I could from what I had done in the past and who I was, but I never, in fact, I've got a script that would be a Hollywood movie that I'm partnered with a man named Kerry Brokaw, who, now you can look him up. He's a producer of note. I brought him the script. I co-wrote it with a guy named David Nickerson. So I'm still trying to put projects together in Hollywood. And I'm also working on a documentary that I've been working on for 4 or 5 years. So it hasn't been that I quit, but the thought that I have the clout to raise the money or to get the money to do the kind of projects I would want to do has long gone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not depressed about it. That's just the way it is. And I'll continue working my heart out on projects that I like, but I have no, just like my brother, I have no guarantee anybody's going to buy them. So what can I do but take my son surfing? Anyway, so.
Which is also, of course, a worthwhile project and a way more important project in a sense than all the movies taken together.
Yeah, I have a daughter who's 15 who's playing on her high school basketball team. And as far as I can tell, she's the first varsity player we've ever had in my entire family. My family, when we got involved with sports, my father was manager of the soccer team in his high school. You know what I'm saying? We never got farther than being a manager. And now there's my daughter. So that's given me a great deal of pleasure. But nevertheless, I love making movies. And if someone will put up the money for this picture, which is called Chemistry, which I'm working with Carrie on, I will do it in a minute. I will jump to it in a minute. I'll put all my time and energy in it. It's a remarkable, controversial script that ideally would have an A-list cast. I mean, it's a big movie. And it's once again, I mean, as Carrie said, he was one of 3 people I sent it to when I knew I needed a partner on it. And all 3 responded and said, let's do the script. So I know it's not just me, but still, we're out to directors, A-list directors, and COVID killed us because and then post-COVID is killing us because all these directors have 6 projects backed up now because they were out of circulation themselves for 2 years. So it's a tough business. And I mean, I can only do what I do, and we'll see what happens.
What is the script about? I found the name Chemistry. I found that project. What's the story of that?
Well, we're not really saying what it's about because it's a big surprise.
Okay.
But it's essentially about a man that invents a cure, but he's an ex-con who was in jail for selling steroids to athletes. And he was sort of put there by the pharmaceutical industry. So it's an anti-pharmaceutical industry movie about what they'll do to keep a cure. So he and another guy dress as clowns and administer to children this drug illegally and become notorious because they're curing something that shouldn't have been able to be cured. And so it's a road movie. They're going around the country using this, and they're being chased by local police. It starts in Portland. Local police who want to help them ultimately, and federal police who want to take them off the streets. But it's comedy. Anyway, there you go. It's really a wonderful script. And the partnership between this chemist, ex-con chemist, and a kid who delivers legal marijuana to people in Portland. That's his job. He's a 25-year-old delivery guy. The relationship is one of the true buddy movies of the world. Anyway, that's it in a nutshell.
Oh, that sounds cool. I would love to see that.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly it would be available to be read. Anyway, so and then this documentary I'm working on is about a bunch of ancestors of ex-slaves in East Texas who are trying to gain access to the cemetery where their ancestors are buried, but it's landlocked and they have no access for the last 50 years. They can't get in to pay respects to their ancestors.
Wow.
It goes all the way back to slavery days. So this has been in the making for 20 years,
Wow.
but I got involved about 5 years ago because I saw the footage and I said, this is a feature-length documentary. It should be made. It's very moving. And so I guess all I do is get involved with impossible projects. Anyway, it's about race and reconciliation.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important documentary.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So you already have material shot and it's currently being edited, or you need more material?
There's 170 hours of footage
Okay.
that these people have done down through the years. And they brought it to me to look at because I had done a documentary called Slingshot that was distributed in some 17 countries by Netflix. No, 17 different languages. You know, it's an award-winning documentary. So they wanted me to look at it. And I was moved to tears by selected footage they sent me. So I thought, God, if I'm moved to tears seeing it for the first time, an audience will be. And so basically, I was motivated by my own emotions. It's called Resurrecting Love.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen the title in your in the list, but I thought it was a project that was already finished.
No, it's
I found a website actually.
Right now we're cutting a rough assembly, and I think we will begin screening to raise the further money we need to finish, because rights have to be cleared. I mean, you know, it's a bureaucratic mess at the other end that we got to actually raise money to. So if we're going to get distribution, we need E&O insurance. In order to get E&O insurance, we have to make sure we've got proper clearances. And I mean, we're using archival footage as well. I mean, it's about history. It's about the history that's not being taught in our schools, as well as these people's struggles. So, I mean, one of the projects I worked on when I was with the company theater, we did a Black History album way back in the early 1970s that itself never got distribution, but I've been a history buff ever since then.
Interesting. So again, you're coming full circle in a sense.
Yeah, in a strange sort of way. I think at this point in my life, I'm choosing passion as the basis for projects that I'm going to get involved with. I love working and I love making films, but it has to come from passion. I'm not looking to be hired on a film, really. I'm looking to work on something I can love.
Yeah, passion is always the best motivation, I guess. And I'm actually reminded of the Roger Ebert review that he wrote for Critters, where he ended with the last sentence says, it's clear that the people who were making this movie had fun making it. So I think that's a good through line through those movies, that you really wanted to make them, that you really, enjoyed making them.
Yeah, and I'm happy it communicates to some. I mean, that's the experience of seeing a film that you've made that works like crazy for the audience, or a theater piece. I mean, we traveled the world, and when we were getting responses in France, where half the people didn't even understand the language we were speaking, when we were getting standing ovations, you can't repeat that. So, so you do need an audience. You can't do it in a vacuum. And I do have political views too, which are important to attach myself to. which whatever the genre of film, my views are in there. They're in Critters as well, you know. Anyway, yeah, I hope I wasn't too verbal for you, but
No, I loved it. I just want to thank you so much for really diving into your whole career and all those movies and memories. For me, it was really fascinating to hear that. I really appreciate that.
well, it was a pleasure, and I mean, thanks for all your knowledge too. You know, I think I'm doing a lot of having kids in their 20s and teens. I'm doing a lot of remembering for them at this stage of my life as well. So I welcome the opportunity to, I mean, it's pretty long ago, some of these movies we're talking about. So I welcome your questions.